Okay, good morning, everyone. It's been a while since I've done a recording. So this is going to be our final exercise for this semester, and then you guys will have your final lab practical. So exercise 13 is going to discuss ecology. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Okay, so I'm just going to start off with the brief introduction of ecology, and I did not do that correctly. Okay. So some objectives for this, we're going to understand how to estimate population size. So we're going to use the mark and recapture method or equation for this. I have it written here, and you will want to make sure to have this on hand for the final lab practical. We're going to describe how to estimate community diversity using either a transect or a plot. And we're going to define trophic structure, including the roles of producers, consumers, and decomposers. So when we started off this semester, we discussed molecules and atoms. We were way down here talking about different bonds. We talked about hydrogen bonds, covalent bonds, etc. And then we moved on to cell types, and we eventually made it on into our kingdoms. Our kingdoms that make up the earth. So plantae, um, animalia, fungi, etc. So that was the organisms. And now we're going to be talking about populations, communities, ecosystems, and biospheres. So the arrows here are going from largest to smallest. I just went from smallest to largest because that's how we discussed it in our course this year or this semester. So, what is a population? Well, a population is a group of interacting individuals of the same species. So, when we say interacting here, um, we usually mean that they are competing or mating. So, this is going to be a group of interacting individuals of the same species. Interacting here means competition for resources. There are two important aspects of a population. So the first one is number of individuals, the second one is distribution in space. So I'm first going to talk about number of individuals in this slide. The next slide discusses distribution in space. So number of individuals, population size is affected by four things: births, deaths, immigration, and emigration. So um, two things that will lead to an increase in population will be births. If you have more births, you're going to have an increase in population, and immigration. If you have more birds immigrating to this area, you're going to have an increase in population. Two things factors can contribute to a decline or a decrease in population, and that would be deaths. If you have a lot of deaths occurring, there's going to be a decrease in that population. Also, if you have a lot of immigration, so a lot of birds leaving to a different area, you're going to have a decrease in that population. So here you just want to know if there's an increase in the population, what can contribute to that increase in the population? Well, it could be either birds or immigration. If there's a decrease in that population, what can contribute to that? Well, it could be deaths or immigration. So now, as far as distribution of populations in space, this is affected by interactions and resources. So here you see three patterns of how they could be distributed in space. You have uniform, which is shown here, and this is very common in terrestrial birds such as penguins. You have random, which is shown here, and this is common with plants with wind dispersed seeds. So, for example, dandelions would have a random distribution. And then you have clumped. This is the most common distribution of all. And here, this is seen in animals that live in groups. So, as shown here, a herd of elephants. You could also see this in a school of fish. You could also see this in plants that drop their seeds straight to the ground. So, an example of that would be oak trees. Okay, so now we're going to go up one. So we were at populations. Now we're going to go up to communities. So community. all organisms, all of the organisms inhabiting and potentially interacting in a particular area. So this is going to be all organisms in a particular area. They have the potential to interact, and this includes everything that's biotic. So this would be plants, animals, plants, but it's also going to be microorganisms. So think about the fungi that interacts with the trees, the microorganisms found in the soil, the microorganisms found in the gut of these animals. So everything biotic. So here there are three aspects to consider in a community. We have feeding interactions, symbiotic relationships, and biodiversity. So the first one is feeding trophic interactions, and these are typically visualized using food webs. And when you talk about feeding interactions, you're going to have like a producer, you're going to have consumer, um, a producer, a primary consumer, secondary consumer, tertiary consumer, decomposer. And we'll talk more about this later, but in activity one. And there are three types of symbiotic relationships. We have here mutualism. So the clownfish and sea anemone, I cannot pronounce that, but it's okay. They have a mutualistic relationship, so both parties are going to benefit. So they both are protected in a way by this interaction. So commensalism would be these birds here, the cattle egret and the cattle. So the cattle egret will feed off the insects found on the cattle. The cattle attracts a lot of insects. So here this bird is going to benefit, whereas the cattle will be unaffected. And then the last one would be a parasitic relationship. And this is oh, the parasitic relationship. And here the tick is going to benefit, by feeding off of the host blood, and the host is harmed in this situation. We already talked about that thing. Okay. And then um the last aspect of a community that we need to consider is biodiversity. So biodiversity has two components. You have richness and evenness. Richness refers to the number of species and is found here at the top. So if you have three species, this is less diverse than if you have five species. This is more diverse. So this adds to the richness. Having more species adds to the richness and the diversity. Evenness is the how much of each species you have. So when you have more of one species, so you have four of this particular species and then just one of this one and one of this one, this is less diverse than when you have a equal number of each of those species, so two of each of those. This is more diverse. So when you think about biodiversity, biodiversity has two components, richness and evenness. Okay. So now we're going to move on to ecosystem. So remember in that flow chart I showed in the beginning, we went population. What contributes to population? We have size and distribution. And then from population, we went to community. What are the three aspects we want to consider in a community? Remember, it's one, feeding interactions, two, symbiotic relationships. We had three symbiotic relationships. And then number three was biodiversity. There are two types of biodiversity, richness, evenness are two factors to consider there. And now we're going to go to the next level, which would be the ecosystem. So all of the organisms in an area or community and the non-living factors. So here we have biotic plus abiotic. So now we're thinking about both living and non-living organisms. And then we go up even further, one more level from ecosystem to biosphere. And this is going to be the entire portion of Earth inhabited by life. This includes land, water, atmosphere, ice, soil, etc. So that is it for the introduction. We'll move on to the activities.